Welcome to the Unitarian Universalist Fellowship of Columbus, Georgia. We're an inclusive group. Religiously, spiritually, and philosophically, we're diverse, but we do share certain principles, and we're going to review those in a few minutes. But visitors should know right off the bat that one of our bedrock principles is we support each other in our own unique personal searches for truth and meaning. And that's an idea we're going to focus on today. But we usually start our services by lighting the chalice, which symbolizes reason, tolerance, and freedom, and also respect, compassion, and love. This morning's service, this is May 24th, 2020, comes to you exclusively via YouTube. Our campus on Heiferhorn Way in Columbus is closed to help slow the current pandemic. Speaking of which, our guest speaker this morning will be Nick Wooten, who's been coming to our fellowship for maybe a year now. Nick's a reporter with the Columbus Ledger-Enquirer, but he actually works for McClatchy, which is a big media company, owns lots of newspapers, including our paper here in Columbus and the Macon paper. So Nick's work appears in both cities, and he is McClatchy's lead reporter for the pandemic in Georgia. So he's a great resource for us, and he's going to talk about finding meaning in a pandemic in Georgia. We'll get right to Nick, but first I do have some announcements. We've got some services coming up that I think are going to be very valuable for surviving the pandemic here in Georgia. Next week, Erica Bloodworth, who teaches yoga at our fellowship, will present a program that's kind of a combination of poetry, prose, and very gentle exercises, some of them breathing exercises that we can use to help ourselves stay mindful and present and kind of live in this underlying crisis that's affecting all of us. Then the next week, June 7th, our presenter will be Joni Andress. And Joni is another mindfulness teacher, and she's also a counselor and a Buddhist nun. And Joni had something really surprising to say to me about fear and anxiety during the pandemic, and how fear and anxiety can sometimes be our greatest teachers. So that's going to be another useful YouTube service for us. Then the big news for us is June 14th, our board has decided that Sunday to reopen our campus, but it'll be a different campus. We will all have to wear masks. We'll have some pretty rigorous social distancing rules, and you can find out about that on our website, uucolumbusga.org. And that's all contingent upon the news from Georgia continuing to improve. So maybe we'll talk to Nick a little bit about that later. So we urge you to make your own decision when deciding whether to rejoin us on Sunday, June 14th. Check our website for details. Again, it's uucolumbusga.org. And there's a handy button on our YouTube channel. So let's get to the service. One of the things that we do in our fellowship is we affirm the 7 principles of Unitarian Universalism. And I'm going to bring Nick in before his presentation. I'm kind of ambushing him. This is a little bit of an experiment on my part. Hi, Nick. You are still muted, so I'm going to unmute you. There you go. Our first glitch.
That's not the first time that's happened. I've been doing this for 2 months, so we've had all sorts of errors at work with this. But thank you for having me, Bill. I really appreciate it.
We're delighted. We're delighted for you to be here. And in preparing for this service, I had a conversation with Nick. I should say, full disclosure, I was a journalist for 30 years. Most of that in a paper very similar to the Ledger-Enquirer, Rapid City Journal in South Dakota. So Nick and I always have a lot to talk about. But one of the questions I asked Nick was, how did he find our fellowship, and why did he choose Unitarian? Why did he choose to come here? Because he wasn't a UU before he found our fellowship. So tell me that story again.
Yeah, sure, Bill. So my fiance, Kelsey Hall, and I moved to Columbus from Shreveport, Louisiana. I grew up in Augusta, but took a job out there to cover city government investigations. We moved to Georgia, and about a month or two after being here, Kelsey really wanted to go to church. She grew up in a much more religious household than I did. Church was something that her family did pretty regularly. My family, they are Christians, but we never went to church. I remember my mom specifically telling me, if anybody asked when I go to school, tell them you're Baptist. And I always sort of like stuck with me. So I was sort of intimidated by potentially going into a church that I really knew nothing about. So I started looking into things because I wanted to do this with her. And I stumbled upon Unitarian Universalism just on an internet rabbit hole one night. And I started looking at it and reading about it. And the 7 principles to me align very closely with journalistic ethics and sort of just, being a good person in general. And I knew based on my research that those fellowships are much more common in, the Northeast or other parts of the country. So I Googled it up, Unitarian Universalism, Columbus, Georgia, and you guys popped up.
So here we are. And, as you pointed out to me, we have a number of journalists in our fellowship. The most prominent in the Chattahoochee Valley for us is Dick McMichael,
right?
We all like to call the Walter Cronkite of the Chattahoochee Valley. So I thought that was an interesting idea. And it's an idea that, despite my 30 years in journalism, it never occurred to me. So let's go through the 7 principles as we usually do. I'm just going to read them, and maybe we'll have something to say see if they really do, see if you're really correct. Do they really fit with the ethics of journalism? And the first principle is the inherent worth and dignity of every person. So.
Oh, yeah, for sure. Bill, I mean, you and I both know that. Anytime that you're taking phone calls from sources or trying to find out information or speaking with public officials, yeah, all of these people that you come into contact with, they trust you with their stories and they trust you to tell them in the correct manner. I mean, you have to, every single day when you wake up and you go out and you talk to people, you have to treat everyone the same.
How about the second principle, justice, equity, and compassion in human relations?
Same sort of concept. You are being trusted to get as close to the truth as possible. And you're trusted to tell the truth. A lot of investigative journalism is sort of centered around that concept of justice. Some of the stuff that I've been doing over the past couple months has definitely centered around that, for sure.
Let's move on to a harder one. Acceptance of one another and encouragement to spiritual growth in our congregations. And I think that might be more specific to UUs. I don't think we're promoting spiritual growth I should say that we're not doing it in our newspapers, but some journalists would be doing. But let's go to the fourth. I want to skip to the fourth principle, a free and responsible search for truth and meaning. That was the working title of your presentation, Finding Meaning in a Pandemic.
Yeah, that's the one that sticks the most with me. And honestly, that's the principle when I read it before, coming to a service that really stuck with me. Because when you're trying to get as close to the truth as you can, you get closer sometimes than you do other times. But you have to be responsible in how you collect information, how you talk with people.
Let's talk about, we're going to save that because we're going to talk about that a little bit later. The fifth principle is a slam dunk, the right of conscience and the use of the democratic process within our congregations and in society at large. And which major newspaper, this is a quiz, which major newspaper says, now I'm not going to remember what it says. It says In the absence of truth, democracy dies.
I think that's the Washington Post.
Thank you. Yeah, you win and I don't. The sixth goal, the goal of world community with peace, liberty, and justice for all. This one's a little fraught. I think the phrase world community gets argued over a lot. But the seventh principle, respect for the interdependent web of all existence of which we are a part. And to me, that has all kinds of significance for this current worldwide pandemic.
Sure. Yeah. You're balancing the public's desire to know information against, families who are losing loved ones, losing parents, brothers, sisters, children. It's tough, and it's especially tough given the current situation right now.
Well, thanks, and thanks for participating in this experiment with our 7 principles. One other tradition of our fellowship, and we'll get through the business of the services. We have a celebration of life toast that was written by our very own Ed Wilson, who's also a journalist and a radio commentator, radio talk show host here in Columbus for many years. It's a celebration of life toast, and here's where I ask people watching on YouTube, if you know what's coming, you already have your cup of coffee or your glass with, depending on what time of day you're watching this, your glass of wine, or in my case, your glass of water. And I am going to read this toast, and you're all going to have one line at the end. So, Nick, do you have something to drink with?
I do not.
You can fake it.
Sure.
We're not going to pause the recording for you to get it. You can fake it. So lift your glasses with me. You can lift your hand. We celebrate life with its beauty and its pain. We lift these cups in tribute to the achievements of human minds and hands, and in sensitivity to the frustrations of misfortune and heartache. Not fixing blame or credit for the outcome of chance. Sensing the risk, savoring the joy, sharing it all. Knowing of the certainty of death and remembering the value of each moment. We drink our toast of celebration to this time, to the future, to each other, to the throbbing of the earth and the sea and the sky with life. All together, we drink this toast in celebration of life. I don't ever get tired of that one. Now it's time for this morning's offering, and there's no escape. I'm going to share my screen here for a minute to show you how you can participate in our I apologize for this is another little glitch. This is our address, Unitarian Universalist Fellowship of Columbus, P.O. Box 698, Fortson, Georgia, 31808. You can mail us a check, or you can go online. This is our electronic collection plate at PayPal, and you'll need a free PayPal account, but it's secure and easy to set one up. And you can donate to uufcga@gmail.com, which is just our email address. It's quick and easy. We Despite the fact that we're not actually operating our campus, we do continue to have expenses. And this fellowship has been very generous, and we've raised a lot of money for local organizations like Feed the Valley too. So this morning's offering will be given and received in grateful appreciation. Excuse me while I do some housekeeping here. So now we get to Nick's presentation, which is going to be a conversation. Oh, thank you. My stage manager Ellen has pointed out that I have forgotten joys and concerns, and normally it's our tradition to turn the microphone on over to people in the fellowship hall, and they have personal joys and concerns, personal things going on in their lives. People are a little bit shy about sharing that on the internet, and who can blame them? So but I do have both a joy and a concern, and that comes up every year on this Memorial Day. I think about it particularly here in Columbus, where there's a Vietnam Memorial Wall, and where there's also a memorial to my unit in Vietnam, the 11th Armored Cavalry Regiment. And I try to visit that every year and look at the names of men that I knew. Because of the pandemic, a lot of Memorial Day services have been canceled. There won't be parades this year. The National Infantry Museum on Monday is holding a live Facebook event that you can sign into if you're a member of Facebook. And it's particularly poignant this Memorial Day because, you know, there's been hundreds of thousands, millions of men and women who have given their lives for this country. But just recently, and it's just on the website of Nick's paper today, a young soldier, very young soldier at Fort Benning passed away during training, collapsed and died during training. And they haven't released a name. I don't know a name, but I'm asking us all to just take a minute, think of that young soldier, his sacrifice, and give a thought to his family and his friends. And I'll light a candle for him. So thank you, Ellen, for reminding me. Now I'm going to share my screen once more because we're getting ready to actually get into the presentation part of our service. If you can see this, this is today's paper, isn't it, Nick?
Yes, that is today's paper.
And Nick wrote this story. He broke this story statewide. The headline, 57,000 antibody tests to be cut from viral test count. I'm gonna let Nick talk about this story a little bit, but this is an example of enterprise journalism. Nick broke this story in the state, and the state has responded, and it has resulted in some corrections about the way we report COVID cases and COVID tests in Georgia. It was an important story. So I guess congratulations on that, but it wasn't exactly a good news story. So let me go back into our share mode, and Nick, tell us a little bit about, without getting down into the weeds too much, about what happened. Why were the state's testing numbers off by 57,000?
Sure. So it actually started this weekend. I was asking questions about Georgia's coronavirus testing totals. And I've been reading some reporting from The Atlantic, the Richmond Times-Dispatch in Richmond, Virginia, and the Texas Observer in Texas, basically saying that these states were artificially inflating their total test counts by combining antibody tests and viral tests into their numbers together. They're two completely different types of tests. Your antibody test shows signs of past infections. Your viral tests show signs for current infections. And there are a lot of benchmarks that the CDC, the federal government, and the World Health Organization have set for states and countries to reopen. And an important part of that is the number of tests performed and the percentage of tests that come back positive for the infection. So if you're adding in all these antibody tests, it makes it look like you're testing more people than you actually are.
So what was the governor's response today?
So when we broke the story Wednesday morning, and the state had not provided us with a number at that time, and there was a lot of discussion about whether or not we wanted to, there was discussion over, should we publish this now, because we don't know the number, we don't know the effect that it's going to have. But we went ahead because we had talked with enough public health experts to realize this was a problem. The state health commissioner was not aware of the practice. She told the Atlanta Journal-Constitution that Wednesday night, and the state has promised that they're going to separate out these two tests. They have not done so yet, but there's a note on the website that says these two different tests are here together.
So Nick, you're in the heart of this pandemic. You haven't, now I understand you haven't been in your office for 2 months, but when I asked you to walk us through a typical day for Nick Wooten, you started at an unusual time.
Yeah, I wanted to start around 1 or 2 a.m. That's usually 1, 2, or 3 a.m. That's usually when I go to sleep, because I've had trouble going to sleep for the past 2 months. I have dreams about statistics, cases, and graphs, and I keep thinking about the next thing that I have to write. So it's been, it's been tough to actually get some shut eye and some rest.
I imagine that, of course, you're having to learn new skills. That's right, because you were not originally hired to cover pandemics.
No, I have learned more about public health in probably the past 2 weeks than I knew before, ever. It is, I can't even put to words how much I've had to learn over the past month. It's remarkable and kind of scary, to be honest.
Well, you're immersed in the statistics. So let me put you on the spot. And I know you have some professional responsibilities to contend with here, but what's your in your professional judgment, are we trending up or down in this pandemic?
So you are seeing some positive signs. The Georgia Emergency Management and Homeland Security Agency is reporting that under 1,000 people statewide are hospitalized for COVID-19. And that below 1,000 number, that's the first time it's been that low since early April. That's a really good sign. Even with the antibody testing, you are seeing an increase in the total number of tests performed, and less people are testing positive. So those are some good signs. Just two, there are a lot of caveats and stuff associated with this data though. If you look at the Georgia Department of Public Health's website, their graph of cases over time looks like it has started to trend a little bit downward, but there's some preliminary data for the most recent 2 weeks that shows a slight uptick. So it's hard to say. There are some good signs, but there are obviously data points where there are some concerns.
Well, let me ask a personal question. How often do you go out in public to crowded places?
I go out only when I have to. I go to the grocery store to pick up groceries. And because I'm working such weird hours, I go pick up food, like fast food for dinner. But I always make sure I wear my mask. I make sure I, use my hand sanitizer. I make sure I'm careful. And that's really because I'm concerned for the people around me. I am much more worried about the people around me getting sick. So I always try to be very careful.
Well, I know you've been immersed in statistics, and that's part of your job. As almost every day you listen to a government briefing, but you've also had some experience on the more personal and really tougher side of the news for a journalist. You want to talk about uh, the youngest victim in the state?
Sure. And that's one of the stories I've written over the past couple months. And I'm not sure if this is still correct, but the youngest listed coronavirus death in the state of Georgia is in Muskogee County. It's a 22-year-old woman. And I was working a weekend shift on Saturday night and just happened to see the death pop up. It's got the sex of the person, the county they live in, their gender, and their age. And I saw 22 Muskogee County, and I realized that was the youngest to date. So I went ahead and started writing the story and sent it off to my editor because the state had confirmed it. And then I gave the local coroner a call, hoping that he knew something about it so he could tell me more just about the person in general. And come to find out, it was a woman who had given birth a few days before to a baby girl. And I just remember being on the phone with him and my mouth dropping. I couldn't believe that those were the circumstances in which she died. He expressed some concern that there had been a pulmonary embolism, a blood clot that had caused her death. And I could only imagine being the family of that person and reading the story that I wrote, and just how sad that would make them, and how that would make me if I was in their position.
Yeah, that's a tough story, and that's just one of the avalanche of stories you've written. You're writing what, 30, 40, maybe 50 stories in a month?
It depends on the month, but yeah, it's just been a flurry of stuff. You don't really have time to sit there and really process what's going on and process how you feel about it. I'm trying to think of how to explain it to someone who's never had to, be a journalist before. It's nonstop. It really is.
So has the pandemic entered your dream life?
Yeah. Dreaming about graphs, charts, statistics. I wake up in the middle of the night wondering if I spelled a word right or if the comma's in the right place or the period's there. Because now more than ever, getting that sort of stuff is so important, and people are relying on us. And I have to assume that responsibility. I have to make sure that everything is where it needs to be.
What advice could you give members of our fellowship about how they can, and of course we all, you can put in a plug for the Ledger-Enquirer. And I think the Ledger-Enquirer, under some really difficult circumstances, is really doing a terrific job. But how can we improve the way we get our news about pandemic, and how can we put it in perspective?
That's a really good question, Bill. You definitely should be reading the Ledger-Enquirer. I don't want to,
Well, let me go right to the point here, because
yeah.
Journalism, and particularly local journalism, is really in dire straits. Journalism has its own pandemic going on. It's called the internet virus. And so there's so many free sources of news. And I noticed that the Ledger-Enquirer has actually got a donation page now where you can actually, you've made a lot of your stories available for free. So there's a lot of people who are reading McClatchy stories and Washington Post and New York Times and Wall Street Journal stories for free. But you can actually donate, and there's been more talk about a nonprofit model for journalism. How is that? How have people responded to that?
So just throughout the past 2 months, I've noticed a lot more positive emails and comments from readers, people that find what we're doing to be super essential. The donation program that we have now is run through Give Butter, Butter. Just Google Butter Ledger-Enquirer. It's the same sort of model that public radio uses. It's like, hey, if you like our work and you want to support us, please give.
Yeah, well, that's it's interesting, and of course, I don't want to put too fine a point on it. But I'm biased because I'm a former journalist, and many of it view it as a calling rather than just a job. And I know there's lots of jobs that people are very passionate about. I think yours began. You told me a story of your dad printed newspapers for a living. Is that correct?
Yeah, so I did not know that this was the business that I was going to get into until I got into college. But my dad worked at the Augusta Chronicle for 30 years printing newspapers. So I remember being a little kid running around the press room late at night when the next morning paper was whooshing by on machines. And that's no place an 8 or 9-year-old kid should be. It's a very dangerous place. I remember thinking it was so cool. And he would always come home with ink all over him. And then
your dad, let me interrupt. Your dad was an ink-stained wretch.
Oh yeah. He's got home videos of me from the late 90s. I'm 2 or 3 and I'm bringing in the Sunday paper for him. We didn't have a dog, so I was the paper fetcher.
Well, let me just say, as your unlicensed psychologist, that you were doomed from the start. You were going to be a journalist. Nick, this has been fantastic. And I'm hoping that you can maybe come to a Wednesday night discussion group sometime if it works out for your schedule. Normally we'd open the floor up for questions, but we're not doing that on these pre-recorded services. Thank you so much for taking time out of your 60-hour week.
Yeah, sure.
To talk to us.
Yeah, Bill, I wanted to say one more thing really quick. Just sort of cool thing, I guess, in light of all this sort of stuff. Obviously, no one's happy that this is going on, but the work and the story that we broke this week was actually referenced in the Atlantic magazine and the New York Times. So that's little Columbus is on the map.
That's huge, and there's a tradition because the Ledger-Enquirer has won 2 Pulitzer Prizes. One of them was in the 1930s, I think, for a series of stories on lynchings. And another one was in the late 40s, early 50s, I think, for a story about the whole Phoenix City thing. And McClatchy is a big media company, but it's kind of renowned for its coverage of a number of issues. And McClatchy papers have won a number of Pulitzer Prizes, too. So I think you're doing good work. Congratulations. Get some rest if you can.
Yeah, thank you, Bill, and stay safe, everybody.
Okay. We extinguish the chalice here that it might glow gently in our hearts. May it light your path as you leave this place or whatever place you happen to be in. And now our closing words. With unity of spirit, we go our ways in universal fellowship until we meet again. Thank you.